I'm Parikshit Luthra. With less than 4 weeks to go for the union budget, industry bodies and associations are busy making representations and recommendations to the Finance Ministry. The Swadeshi Jagran Manch, which is the economic wing of the RSS, has pitched for a hike in tariffs on Chinese imports. It has said that Chinese imports are hurting India's manufacturing sector and resulting in capacity underutilization. This comes at a time when we learn from sources that the government is concerned about countries like Vietnam benefiting from China Plus One and is now mulling a calibration in strategy. The centre is reviewing its stance on Chinese investments to ensure global companies relocate to India. India's current account deficit surged to $36.4 billion in the second quarter. Joining me now to take this discussion forward are Ashwani Mahajan, co-convener of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, Anup Wadhawan, former Commerce Secretary, and Jayant Dasgupta, former ambassador to the WTO. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Dasgupta, to you first, do you feel that further increasing tariffs on China is the way forward to reduce the current account deficit?
The first thing I wanted to mention is that we just can't increase the tariffs on China alone. That would not be in keeping with our commitments at the WTO, whereby we have given most favored nation treatment to China. If we feel that there is underpricing, that is, dumping is taking place, or subsidies are being given in contrary to the WTO commitments of China, then we can take action against China. But raising the tariffs on China alone is, I don't think it is on.
Right. Raising tariffs alone is not the way out. But let me get in Anup Wadhawan at this point. Mr. Wadhawan, what are the tools that India really has at its disposal to reduce this current account deficit? Looking at the export scenario globally right now, the slowdown in demand, will we have to take more steps to increase tariffs?
No, actually, you see, our current account deficit, if you look at it historically, the worst it was 190. The worst it was $190 billion in 2012-13. Then 21-22, that number got repeated, but on a much larger export volume. So in a sense, the worst was 12-13, but now in this financial year 22-23, we are already at about $200 billion, and we'll end the year at about $263 billion trade deficit, much over the $190 billion, and on a export volume which is likely to be 392%. So as a percentage of exports, we'll be at that 12-13 ratio of around 65 odd percent. 65 odd percent of exports is the trade deficit that is likely to be this year. So we are at that, worst ever number which we achieved in 12-13. So what are the tools we have? Tariffs are, in my view, certainly not the tool to use. For one, you have to use it on a multilateral basis, as Ambassador Dasgupta mentioned. And secondly, unless, there is a supply response domestically, which is going to kick in very quickly, tariffs will simply mean higher prices for your users, many of whom are, manufacturers, which will, in a sense, worsen your domestic economic situation. So I don't think tariffs are the answer. The answer is to strengthen your domestic investment environment, and strengthening your domestic investment environment will improve your capacity to export. It will reduce unnatural dependence on imports. It will, over time, correct your current account deficit and also strengthen your capital account. You see, your capital account is very biased in favor of portfolio investments, which are volatile and, uncertain. Right. And the FDI is low relatively because our investment environment is not very attractive. So if you improve your investment environment, not only you improve your current account, you also improve your capital account. The proportion of portfolio investment will come down, and the proportion of FDI, which is stable and steady and reliable, that will go up. And also enhance your, manufacturing capacity and strengthen your current account again. So the solutions we have are strengthening your domestic environment, and many steps which have been taken need to be persisted with. For instance, the production-linked incentives which have been introduced That is the way to strengthen your domestic, investment environment. And we need to make it more comprehensive.
Okay.
Because PLIs cannot be done beyond a point, but overall competitiveness
Right.
of your domestic manufacturing environment has to be improved. Better logistics, better
All right.
friendly
So the domestic
regulatory
manufacturing
environment and all the
atmosphere,
various.
the environment has to be improved. Let me go across to Swadeshi Jagran Manch, Ashwani Mahajan, who's joining us right now. Mr. Mahajan, you have detailed the budget recommendations of the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. The key among them is your concern about rising imports from China, how this is leading to underutilization of manufacturing capacity. But do you also feel the further increase in tariffs on Chinese imports will make Indian goods more uncompetitive? Because at the end of the day, we would have to pay a higher price for the finished goods.
You see, if you look at the rising imports from China, we understand that what Trump did, Trump imposed higher tariffs of 25% on nearly $250 billion of their imports, and they were successful in reducing the imports to $149 billion. So a huge decline in imports could happen with a small increase in tariffs. That was about 20 to, they were increased to 25%. We understand that US has that leverage in WTO that they can impose on single country tariffs. They can raise tariffs for single country, but we have to increase tariffs for across the board. But yes, we understand that most of the commodities which we are importing from China, we are importing mostly from China only, those commodities. They are chemicals, they are electrical equipment, they are various other commodities, electronics and all. So we in India have been spending hugely on the production linked incentive schemes. Nearly about 3 lakh crores we are going to spend in few years only. So to gain the maximum out of it, we can't allow our industry to be killed. As I want to underline here, there are about 7 units, 7 plants working for viscose, and only one of them is actually working. 6 of them are not at all working. So there is a huge underutilization of capacity. So this is only because the Chinese are dumping their goods. They are sending here using under invoicing and several other unethical and illegal means also. We are going to catch them. It will take time, but how can we allow our industry to be in such a condition that we are not able to use our capacity? So on the one hand, we are encouraging our industrialists to improve their capacity.
Mr. Mahajan, which would be the sectors or products? If I would ask some key sectors where you would like tariffs to be increased on Chinese goods, which would those be?
Yeah, first of all, textile, then electrical equipments, then chemicals, then the electronics and telecom. So these are the sectors where the huge amount of Chinese imports are coming, and these are also sectors. If you look at the government policy of PLI, we have identified around 15 segments where the PLI has been implemented. Now, with this PLI scheme to fructify and to help our industrial sector to come up, if you see, I would like to ask even Mr. Wadhawan and also from Jayant Dasgupta that, in the last few years, from 2010-11 to 2019-20, we have seen a huge decline in our manufacturing. We have been making all our efforts towards infrastructure, towards building up our industrial base, but nothing could happen. It is all because the kind of dumping which is happening, the anti-dumping duties are becoming totally irrelevant, ineffective, and therefore the only way left with us is Mr. Wadhawan raised this issue of WTO. You know, in WTO we have nobody knows better than Mr. Wadhawan that we have 40% bound rates in WTO, and we are imposing hardly 6% weighted average tariff. So there is a huge scope from 6% to 40%. I'm not saying that to raise them to 40%. What I'm just saying is that you raise them by 5%, 10%, wherever our industry will become competitive, and we have to make use of our industrial intelligence for this purpose. And we must raise this tariff unless if we don't,
Yeah, I'll quickly get in reactions to what you're saying. Ambassador Dasgupta, to get you in, Mr. Mahajan raised some issues about the textile sector, about chemicals, about electronics. He's saying that our manufacturing share in the GDP is coming down. Would this be the right way ahead? Do you feel there is room to raise the average weighted tariff? This is also a time when we are signing FTAs. We want to attract global investors, and many of them want to continue joint ventures with their Chinese partners. So what is the way ahead? Is what Mr. Mahajan recommending in terms of increasing the average weighted tariff? To what extent can it be done according to you?
There is a lot of water between the applied and the bound rates at the WTO. But as Anup has also pointed out, and Professor Mahajan also acknowledges, the WTO discipline says that you have to do it multilaterally. You have to raise the tariffs against everybody. Now, if we confine our attention to China, what is it that we are importing? We are importing a lot of fertilizers. We are importing a huge amount of organic chemicals, including our APIs for our pharmaceutical industry. We are importing inorganic chemicals. We are importing all kinds of metals and metal products. Then the large chunk is capital goods and electronic items, including consumables, including components also, which are required for the PLI schemes in different sectors. So now the issue is that we have to build up our own industry. There is no two ways about it. But we also need to build in the capital goods will be required in the beginning. And then we had this scheme in electronics earlier that we used to have import duties raised for items for which the production could take place in India, and we had the capacity. And then once the production came on stream, we could reduce the duties in a phased manner. So that is, I think, something which we can perhaps follow once again. But to put a kind of a tariff barrier for China alone in whichever way we want to, I think it will hurt our own domestic industry more than anything else. The specific point about textiles, which Professor Mahajan raised, I would like to place just 2-3 facts in this context. One is that we are importing a lot of man-made filament and man-made fiber from China and as raw materials. The second aspect is that we are buying a lot of technical textiles and specialty textiles from China. We are also buying regular textiles, which is required by our own garment industry, because the foreign buyers, these days they tell you which factory to buy from, which product to buy in order to convert it into garments. So there is a kind of a knock-on effect. If we raise the barrier, there would be problems with our downstream industries. Of course, for exports, there is this advanced license scheme, so we can import fabrics duty-free. But I think the figures that are reflected, about $500 million worth of fabrics which are imported, they include the fabrics which
Right.
are being imported under the advanced license scheme as well. On electronics,
Okay.
I think the PLI scheme has started showing very good results especially in mobile phones. And that is, this momentum needs to be kept on. And for this, we need to have capital goods imported, because the investments will have to take place. Then components will have to be bought mainly from China, but also from Taiwan, Korea, to a certain extent from Japan and other countries. And then once we have that capacity, it is going to be a calibrated exercise. Then we can raise the tariffs in a gradual manner, and we can let the industry find its own feet and be competitive.
Okay, my final question to Mr. Wadhawan. Mr. Wadhawan, when it comes to the China Plus One strategy, this is something that the Swadeshi Jagran Manch has also said, that we must take advantage of the China Plus One strategy. But when it comes to the advantages that China has in terms of the tax structure, in terms of transportation, infrastructure, how can we give some of those advantages? How do we counter China to those great logistical, infrastructure, transport advantages that China gives as a market to any manufacturing company?
You see, we need to match the best investment environments in the world, in particular when you're competing with China and with other alternative destinations like Vietnam and other Southeast Asian countries. Then you need to match their environment and be as competitive as them on all aspects: your regulatory framework, policy framework, logistics, utilities, your transportation network. So we need to match them, and so that is the key solution to our economic problems. We are already a high-cost economy, and that is primarily the reason why we are a poor investment destination today, not only for domestic investors but for foreign investors. By raising tariffs, you will make yourself even a higher cost economy than before. It is going to add to cost for your manufacturers. And that is why I think most countries across the world that have, developed well over time have not resorted to tariffs as a, mainstream strategy. They've selectively used tariffs in some particular sectors, but not as a mainstream strategy for development. And subsidies, targeted subsidies are the solution. PLIs are those targeted subsidies we are using. So you can't use both. PLIs are being used because tariffs are a problem. Tariffs are a problem because they add to the costs of your manufacturers and make your investment destination actually worse. Now look at Vietnam. They've entered into trade agreements with various countries. Almost 99% of their duties will go to zero for major economic blocs, for ASEAN, for European Union, in RCEP. Vietnamese duties will go to zero on 99% of their commodities. But their competitiveness makes them a very, very attractive investment destination. So they have the confidence to say that we'll bring our duties down to zero and we'll be so competitive that we will be the favored manufacturing destination. And that is what you need to do. And countries like Vietnam have also used PLIs. They've used PLIs very, very effectively. They realize that tariffs are not the answer. The answer is to make yourself competitive. A starting point can be giving targeted subsidies through mechanisms like PLIs. And when we talk of President Trump, we use those security duties, security clauses, which we can use. Technically, we can use a security clause and put duties against a particular country. But then look at the retaliation that America had to face. And they had to give $12 billion of subsidies to their farmers. So these actions, we need to measure them very carefully. We need to measure the possible, retaliation that will happen to such actions.
All right. We've run out of time, but thank you very much, Mr. Ashwani Mahajan, Mr. Wadhawan and Mr. Dasgupta for joining us here on the program, giving us your view on how to work on the current account deficit. address the shortcomings as far as our manufacturing sector goes and reducing imports as well. We're heading into a short break, but coming up on the other side, the government releases its consultation paper on online gaming regime, proposes self-regulation, mandatory players verification and additional due diligence. Don't go anywhere. We've got a discussion coming up with Roland Landers of All India Gaming Federation.